Hey, Trisha. Oh, I don't know if, are you not able to unmute? Tavia, I don't think she can unmute.
I'm going to have to ask Amy to make her host, and I don't know why my function is not working.
I think it worked. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, yes, we can. Hi, Trisha.
Okay. Hey, Jennifer, help me out just a minute.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll have trouble pronouncing words. Pronounce your last name for me so I can get it right.
Okay, it's Wotring.
Wotring. Did I get
Yes.
it right?
Yes.
Watring. Okay. I hope I get it right when I go to talk.
It's okay.
Sometimes I have problems. I tell everybody I'm very smart. I can read perfectly. Just sometimes words don't come out my
Sometimes I look at words and I think they should be said one way, and you're like, is that how you say that?
Always blame it on my accent because I've lived in West Virginia since I was 3. It's funny though, I was born in California because my dad was in the military. So when people ask me where I'm born, I'll say California. Can't you tell by my accent?
So have you been in the other sessions as well? How have things been going?
I did yesterday. I was in and out on the session, the opening session today, but it seems like they're being very well attended and going well. So
good. And your folks can get their STARS credit, and that's awesome for them.
Yeah. It's exciting because I guess just a lot more people are talking about after school now, or not talking about after school, but it's getting more attention on the federal and state level now. So that's a good thing for us.
It's always a good thing as long as it's good attention. It's a good thing.
Right.
We don't want that.
I hope it's just not like a lot of promises that are out there. That I hope it's a scary time and kind of an exciting time. We're kind of on that cusp, I think, maybe of getting back to normal some ways, and then what's that normal going to look like?
Yeah, and it's a big consideration. I mean, there's kids have been through a lot.
Yeah.
Overall.
Hi, ladies. We have 1 minute to go. So do you want to admit?
Sure.
All right, and we have about 43 minus the admin team and the 2 speakers, both of you. Okay. 44. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to I guess it's the last session of the day. We're happy to see you all here, and hope you have been enjoying your session so far. I'm going to introduce our speaker, then kind of jump to watching what you're doing in chat and being able to see what's going on there and help to share that with Jennifer. So we have Jennifer Wotring here with us today, and Jennifer in 2006 joined the Ed Adventure Group and built upon her existing experience to become a skilled presenter, facilitator, and trainer. With over 15 years of experience, Jennifer regularly develops and delivers educational programming and professional development to students, staff, and administrators within schools and extended learning programs. Jennifer also serves as a family engagement support specialist for the West Virginia Statewide Family Engagement Center, supporting schools across the state in their efforts to increase family engagement. Jennifer excels in providing event planning and logistics facilitation for the organization's events and a variety of other educational clients. Jennifer holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice with a minor in psychology. And I'm excited to hear what she has to say to us today.
Sorry, I wasn't allowed to unmute myself, so you weren't going to hear me say much because I couldn't talk. Thank you, Tricia, for that introduction. For those of you that were on the last session, I'm sorry you had to hear that again, but thanks for joining. I looked down through the list and I see some other names that were not on the session that we just wrapped up. But for those of you that were already on the session and heard about who I am, you can kind of take a couple minute breather. But for those of you that weren't, as Tricia said, my name is Jennifer Wotring. I'm a senior program manager with the Adventure Group here in Morgantown, as well as a family engagement specialist for the West Virginia Family Engagement Center. The Adventure Group actually received that grant from the U.S. Department of Education in 2018, and it is helping 100 schools across the state of West Virginia increase family engagement within their schools, which then ultimately improves student learning. Literacy and numeracy are the two focus areas. I've been with Adventure for the last 15 years. Maybe I just had my 16th anniversary, and I can't remember, but obviously it's something that I love, and I can't even remember how long I've been doing it. But it's exciting for me to be able to come to you today to really talk about kind of how both of my passions are meshing right now. And that those two things are family engagement and after school. I've been working with after school programs for probably the last 10 or 12 of the 15 or 16 years that I've been with the Adventure Group. And that work has ranged from developing program content, or when after school was talked about 15 years ago, there really wasn't any specific content that programs could use, and funders were really looking for ways to see student achievement. They wanted to see student gains for funding, and programs were like, well, that's great, but we don't have anything that can help us do that. So we developed a curriculum that was used by numerous sites in Pennsylvania and a few sites in West Virginia. And then that kind of developed into more of a professional development and consulting role. So I do work with not only the programs in West Virginia, but also the statewide. I'm working with leading the STEM and family engagement community of practice. I recognize some names from that program that we are doing with the network and 21st Century at the State Department. And really today, I want to talk about something called framing. And I'll be very honest with you where this all came about. For the West Virginia Family Engagement Center, we were putting together some content for a kickoff that we were doing with our cohort 3 schools. And they wanted to put information about framing in there. And I had never really heard of framing or knew what they were talking about when they were talking about framing. But I thought, well, I probably should go learn a little bit more about it. So I watched a video, a documentary or something that was put together on framing. And it was fascinating to me because I recognized that many of the comments that were being made by they did like a man on the street interview. And I realized that it really does impact the way we think about education and the way that we talk about education, family engagement, after school, whatever the topic is. It doesn't matter. It applies to many different topics. So I developed this session with that in mind and really wanting to help you recognize why messaging is important. Obviously, it seems like it's common sense. Well, of course, it makes a difference what you say about your program or how you advertise your program. But I want you to consider it even a little bit further, think about it in a little more detail, and what that framing idea is. So the objectives for today's session are to understand the idea of framing, understand the concept, what it means, and then be able to define family engagement. And there's a reason, everybody will say, well, of course, we know what family engagement is. But if you think about family engagement, I'd like to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper. Then you're going to learn about, and I'm going to see a typo on my session, learn about various traps in public thinking and strategies to avoid these traps. And again, this was probably the most meaningful part of the information that I saw that I wanted to share with you, because there's a lot of different thinking about after school and about family engagement. And we want to make sure that when we're sharing messages about our program, whether we're trying to recruit families, whether we're trying to recruit staff, that we know what those traps are. Next thing is understand why messaging is important to building relationships and engagement. And then finally, challenges of family engagement virtually and some different strategies for ways that we can overcome those challenges. So to get started, what is family engagement? Okay, what does that mean? What is family engagement? And if you think about the past, prior to the last several years, it was called parent engagement. And now I say family engagement, but you'll also hear me say caregiver, because it's not necessarily always the parent that the child is being raised by. And now it's not necessarily always a family member that they're being raised by. So I'll use parent, I'll use family, I'll use caregiver kind of interchangeably. So I'd like to use a Mentimeter tool for this. So if you go to menti.com and use the code that is listed before you, and I will actually copy and paste that into the chat as well, so you can just click on the link. I would like you to kind of put, what is family engagement to you? So you'll bring up Mentimeter, or it's menti.com. The code is before you. And then I'd like you just to share, what is family engagement in your mind? Okay, so we have some word cloud words popping up. And if you're familiar with word clouds, you'll know that it's basically the more times that a word is mentioned, the more prominent, whether it's a bolder color or a larger font, the word will appear. So what is family engagement? Meaningful conversations, connections, educational, connecting with them, relationships, partnerships. I see support, support is one that's bigger. Community, I like the community, and there's a reason why I like the mention of that. We see relationships, keeps moving every time. Fun, safety, bond. So there's a few words now before you, some more are added. Establishing relationships. We talked in the last session a lot about relationships, and family engagement is extremely, extremely based on relationships that are formed among those that are caring for the child, both at home, at school, and in the after school program. Communication is very important as well. Bond is mentioned a couple times. Involvement. So like I said, as you can see, many, many different words that you think of, that come to mind when you think of family engagement. When you look at we'll call it the NAFSC formal definition from 2010, I highlighted some words in the bulleted definitions, but it's a shared responsibility with schools and other community organizations or agencies that are committed to reaching out to engage families in meaningful ways. So I probably should have highlighted the meaningful ways there as well. Families are committed to actively supporting their children's learning and development. And I'll ask a question after I go over these, but family engagement is continuous across a child's life, and it entails enduring commitment, but the changing parent roles as children mature into young adulthood. So that engagement, that is continuous throughout the child's life, but it looks different. It looks different as they get older. And then finally, that family engagement cuts across and reinforces learning in multiple settings. And that's why I feel that it's so important to talk about in the after school setting. It's important at home, in pre-kindergarten programs, in school and after school programs, faith-based organizations, and in the community. So when you look at this definition and you look at some of the things that we say that family engagement is, why do you think these other entities are included? If it's family engagement, what do you mean it takes place in places other than school or home? You know, why does it involve the community? Somebody, and I think you should be able to unmute. If you can, feel free to unmute and share. If not, feel free to use the chat. But why are we talking about family engagement in some place other than school or home?
Because you have the probability of greeting or meeting these families and children outside of the home or school in your community, at the park, grocery store. You see these families all the time.
Excellent. You're in the community, you see these families all the time. Where do families engage in their children's education? Is it only in the school, or does it happen everywhere? And I think you'll see from the last bullet, it can happen anywhere. So keep in mind that definition of family engagement. Keep in mind the words that excuse me, that you used in the word cloud to describe it. And let's talk for a minute about framing. So framing is the choices we make in what we say and how we say it. And so if you ever, I just happen to be one that gets this, had got this a lot growing up from my parents. And then subsequently, I have 2 children that turned out just like me. So I say quite often, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. That's framing. It's what we emphasize, how and what we explain, and then some of it is what we leave unsaid. So when you think about framing, these choices matter because it impacts how people hear us, and how they process what they're hearing obviously depends on their circumstances, their experiences. But if we change the way we talk about something, then we can change the story. We can change what's said. We can change, anything. But it's not about like a script. It's not saying, here is what the ABC after school program does. And someone says, we do, and starts listing bullets. That's not framing. It's about what we emphasize, and it's about the audience. And so if we're talking to a group of classroom teachers about after school programming, then we're going to emphasize something a little bit different than if we're talking to a group of families. So we adapt it for our audience, but it helps us think about the messaging that we're portraying about our program. So when you think about authentic family engagement, it's more than just back to school nights. Back in the day, family engagement was the parent-teacher conference. So that kind of became impossible during the closure, during the pandemic, in some cases even now, because we're not able to gather in large groups within the school or within the after school program. So it's more, family engagement is more than just that one-way communication where we are telling someone something about their child, because there's a lot more to that child that is going on than just what we're telling that parent. That parent has, or that caregiver or that family member has valuable information for us about that child. So there was research, and all this framing comes from an organization called Frameworks. And so it really looks at how the public thinks of family and community engagement. And there's other topics. I mean, Framework works on other topics, but for the purposes of this, it's talking about family engagement. So they did like 3 years worth of research. There were 6,000 participants. And what they found was that there was attention needed to be paid to messaging and how we're talking about family engagement, how we're talking about education in general. So the elements of framing, when you correctly frame an idea or an issue, you know what you're up against by understanding how people think and feel about the issue. You want to think about it in terms of, again, going back to, I think I can go back to what we say and how we explain it. And then also that part of what we leave unsaid. You know, one of the things that I think about quite often now is whether or not people agree or disagree with masks. So if you're talking about family engagement and you know that masks, whether you're for or against, tend to be a touchy situation, that's probably something that you're going to want to bypass for the purposes, depending upon who your audience is. Number 3 element of framing is make deliberate choices when presenting information, what to emphasize, what to explain, and what to leave unsaid. So again, thinking about framing, thinking about why we frame, when there are a lot of, and the resource that I pulled this from, I'll share with you, but the resource itself will help you identify some strategies. So when you are approaching something, you know, it'll help you say, well, if you say this, they think this. And one of the situations I can think about from years ago is when they first started installing locks on doors at schools, where you couldn't just walk in and go pick up your child. You had to actually ring the buzzer. The secretary had to greet you and then let you in. There were a lot of schools put up these big stop signs, and they really upset parents because the parents couldn't understand why they weren't just allowed to go in and get their child. They thought that by not allowing, if I said you're not allowed in unless you ring the bell, what they were thinking was, you're not letting me have access to my child, and there must be something that's going on that you don't want me to know about. So, but in all actuality, it was a safety issue. So knowing these things in advance and thinking about your messaging can make a big difference. The other side of that is, when people don't know something, they'll make it up. So if you're not out, I mean, there's one part of it that if you have people that are talking negatively about your program is one issue. But if you have people that aren't talking at all about your program, that's a whole other issue, because people will make up what they don't know, or in some cases they know it and they embellish and add to it as well. But you want to make sure that you're thinking about that when you're, you know, whether, like I said, when you're recruiting, when you're talking about the great things your program is doing, you know, you want to make sure that you stay away from some of those triggering remarks that may, like, past beliefs may come up, and then suddenly the person isn't even listening to what you're saying. So, as I said, if we change the way we talk about engagement, we can begin to change the way people talk to others about family engagement. And so my question to you is, why do we care about family engagement in after school? Why is that even a topic? Why is that important? Why is it important to engage families in their child's education in the after school environment? Because they're doing enough during the school day, and teachers in the school day are trying to get them to engage. So why do we have to talk about it? Why does it matter for us? Feel free to unmute or to type in the chat. Anyone?
It completes the circle of a support system.
Okay. It completes a circle of the support, completes the circle of the support system. Good. We all have to stay connected. Again, if we don't know that something is going on with a child, it makes it very difficult for us to build that relationship with them. In addition, families need to understand that if you, again, it's you have to think about your messaging, but when you look at the statistics and you look at the research, family engagement, the impact of family engagement is much, much greater than some of the things that we would think about whether or not, and that impact whether or not a child's going to succeed. So we have to stay connected. It matters. But when we think about how we talk about family engagement, when we think about how we talk about after school programming, why does word of mouth matter to our program? So open up Mentimeter. And again, the code is in front of you. Let me see if I can put the link in here again. And I'd like you to briefly, it's not a word cloud this time. You're actually going to have to type in a little bit of text. But how is your program impacted by word of mouth? Take a couple minutes and think about that, and then visit Mentimeter and enter that information in. True experiences about the program. Can stir up positivity and guide new families in your direction. Excellent. Credibility. It will either make you or break you. Parents acquire more information about when they have heard good things about families. Excellent. Yes, that is definitely a negative that can occur if someone badmouths the librarian, and sometimes, in some cases you have to do a little bit of damage control. People have a tendency to believe what they hear and prejudge, so good or bad, it can influence people and potential clients. Students and parents get excited and want to be part of the program. Right, so positivity can really impact your program. Positive remarks can impact your program in a good way. Negative remarks can obviously impact it in the opposite direction. Defines your reputation, usually very good. Facebook is how our word of mouth works, as we are rural, so we really pump positive info out there constantly. Yes, people talk, it gives us good support. Excellent. So when it's good, it's really good. But when it's bad, it can also be really bad. I know that our person from the library shared an issue that they had with word of mouth in their program. Does anyone else want to share something that may have happened at their program where the program was either positively or negatively impacted by word of mouth. A specific example. I heard somebody unmute.
I work for the Charleston YMCA, and we have actually a lot of people who, if they come and talk to our children, they talk about how the YMCA impacted their life, that they started there as young kids, and they even will go off to college, and when they are able to come back and work, they'll work for our summer programs and talk about how much of an happy experience it was for them to be there.
Excellent. So that's great messaging that you can put out too. And I saw that a lot whenever schools were going back into session after summer, that there were some counties that went back to alumni and used their experiences with school and what they're doing now to really promote the program and what was going on. Who else? Most of these talk about parents, but who else can share good and bad things about your program? What about your participants? What about the kids? Staff is another one. Yes. So you really want to think about the perception, the messaging, how you're framing what you're putting out there, and making sure that, you know, if there is an issue, sweeping it under the rug really never works. You know, addressing it, bringing it, they're not always great conversations to have, but you know, addressing it and making sure that folks are aware that there was, you know, a challenge and this is what you're going to do about it. When you think about framing, and when we're talking about framing, there are some traps in public thinking. And again, this is from the NAFSCI video. And it talks about the way people think about certain concepts and certain ideas. And when you talk about them, that's what comes to mind. So making sure that, for example, when I say, like I explained to you that it's no longer just parent engagement, it's family engagement, it's community engagement, it's caregiver engagement. And I do that because I don't want me saying parent engagement to completely have someone quit listening because they're not the child's parent. So again, that's a very basic example, but I think hopefully you get the idea of what some of those words can start to generate in people's thinking. So the first one is, it's called the tangible triangle. And I try to find a way to be able to show you some of the videos, but I couldn't incorporate them in. But in the tangible triangle, what happened is when they went out and they did kind of the word on the interviews on the street, kind of man on the street interviews, and they asked people, who has an impact on a child's education? These are the three people that they said: teachers, students, and parents. So when you look at the tangible triangle, who does that leave out? Teachers, students, and parents. Who's left out of that? Childcare. Thank you, Sabrina. Who else? Community, yes. Friends. Grandparents, absolutely. Peers, other stakeholders in the child's life. So what about administrators? What about the medical community? What about policymakers? What about funders? What about taxpayers? All coaches, yes, that's a good one as well. Administration, somebody had injured that too. So when you think about and when you're talking about family engagement, you want to make sure that you approach that knowing that a majority of the people who are not working in the environment that you are think that family engagement and those people that have an impact on a child's education are teachers, students, and parents. So that becomes an issue because if everyone thinks that, then all the accountability lies on these three groups of individuals. And in this case, it's talking about parents. And so we're forgetting the larger, the larger child care, whether it's grandparents, grandfamilies, kinship care, whoever is caring for that child. So again, when your messaging is going out, if you say family engagement, you might reword that into just engagement, or be specific about who you believe as a program has impact on a child's learning. And I think it's all of the ones that we've mentioned here today. The next trap in public thinking is that caring is everything. That if you care, that's what engagement is that you care. So it prevents the public from understanding this full scope of engagement. So what that means to, we'll say teaching, for example, that if we think that teaching is done by good teachers and those people care, then the bad teachers obviously don't care. The same is true for families. Good families are the ones who engage, and bad families and good families are the ones who care. So then that means bad families must be the ones that don't care because they don't engage. And that's not the case. We know that there are a lot of families that would engage in their child's education if they knew how, if they knew what that meant, if they didn't have a bad experience with education themselves. So the caring part of your program is very important when it comes to how you care for the students, how you care for the participants, and even extending in how you care for the families of those individuals. But that trap of thinking that caring, that if a parent doesn't engage, then they must not care, isn't true. The article had gone on to say that those that don't show up must be the ones that don't know what's problematic, and that we certainly know that there are a lot of reasons parents don't engage, and it may not be anything to do with not caring. There are a lot of reasons that parents don't engage, especially when you get into, someone just said they lost audio. You might try to reboot. So finding ways to ensure that they understand that engagement can take place anywhere. Just because they don't come to a family STEM night at your program doesn't mean they don't care. It doesn't mean they don't want to be engaged. There are things that you can do in the home on a regular basis that engage in education, in a child's education. Traditional engagement, and this is something we talked about a little bit earlier, that families are not the same anymore. Caregivers are now grandparents or others who are limited or not aware of engagement today. That's excellent, because that leads right into here. And you would think Brittany and I, it shows my mic is off. Tavia, can you maybe assist the person in the chat to see why they aren't able to hear? But Brittany's comment about families not being the same anymore and grandparents or others who are limited or not aware of engagement today, many of those folks think about traditional engagement. They think of big sales and parent-teacher conferences and reading day at the school, where a family member can come in and read to the children. They see that as engagement, and that's very much narrowing the scope of what engagement is. But traditionally, without being exposed to it on a regular basis, or without the messaging coming across from your program, that is it's about so much more. So what are some things that you do within your program that kind of are outside of that traditional mold of family engagement? You can unmute or put it in the chat, either one. What are some things that you're doing around family engagement that it's outside what people traditionally think family engagement is? No one? Anybody doing some traditional family engagement things? Oh, okay. Free festival last month. Good. Anything else? Oh, take-home packets for our usually in-house programs. We use those also to advertise future programs. Excellent. Cookouts outside of the center, Grandparents' Day, opportunities like rented the movie theater and invited everyone. Family days, trunk or treating this year, a dinner for our families. Excellent. So what that trunk or treat and going to light up lanterns for Lights On After School. Oh, good. Very good. Yeah. Lights On After School is coming up later in October. So that's an excellent way to think outside the box to do something for families. Farmers market and online literacy activities. Yes. Excellent. So you want to think about when you're talking about family engagement, when you're putting that message out about how your program engages families, you talk about those things that are non-traditional, that you're still, it depends on the site. For intermediate school, we have stations that parents can participate in with their students. That's excellent for Lights On. So you want to help families understand what engagement looks like now, especially those families who may be older generational individuals that look at traditional engagement. Really, if you think about it, a lot of individuals think that engagement has to take place in the school. And so that becomes difficult when you have situations like someone commented that they're a red county. And so when last year, the Preston County program was completely virtual. And so if you think that, if in your mind, you think that engagement has to take place in the school or in a classroom, then you think, well, how can engagement happen if we're not there? So making sure that your messaging includes those non-traditional things, those packets, that's excellent. Reading at home, all of those things. The next trap in public thinking is something called the culture of poverty. And this is a phrase that is used a lot when we're talking about West Virginia. And at the time when I was using it, or when I heard others use it, I just thought in my mind that it was a cycle of things, that a child lived, a parent raised their child in the same fashion that they lived in. And so if that was a difficult environment or a low income environment, then that's what they knew and that's what they saw. And so there's all kinds of engagement statistics around that. But when you look at it as a trap in public thinking, it assumes that certain communities or families won't or can't engage. So what it talks about is that some communities are good, some communities are bad. And those that are in a community that is high poverty, low socioeconomic would be seen in this, for this example, as bad. So that means that they wouldn't engage. And that's not necessarily the case. So it assumes a lot about certain communities and what they're willing to do when it comes to engagement. And again, it's a widely used phrase in education. And we want to make sure that we are not making those assumptions about any group, whether it is based on race or gender or religion or socioeconomic status. So thinking about culture of poverty, thinking about how that's used, and really kind of changing, reframing your messaging to not specifically look at any one group, but open up engagement to everyone, regardless of the community that they're in or the background that they have. And the last one is that I'd like to talk about narrow benefits. And so this one was really interesting to me because when they walked up to these people and they asked the questions, they said to them, how can communities impact schools and how do schools impact communities? And everyone that they talked to pretty much said that there's no connection, there's no correlation between the support that communities can provide schools and the support schools can provide the communities. So what's wrong with that? Anybody see an issue with that they would want to share? Anyone? Okay, I'll share. So the issue with that is that our communities can play a huge role in a child's education. And there are there's a lot of impact on the community depending upon our schools. And so that what we talked about earlier, and those people that we're leaving out, if we have just the triangle, if you think about communities, when you talk about family engagement, you include communities in that. That helps people to understand. You may have to explain ways that the communities can be involved, but when you make sure that it is a family and community engagement. The other thing is that in a lot of counties and a lot of cities, there are school levies that fund programming, whether it's after school programming or regular school day programming. And in some of those communities, there are individuals that are not families. They don't have children that are in the schools, but it's just as important to engage them because they vote. And you want them to see the benefit of a good education in the community. You want them to see how this can impact them, even if they don't have a child in the school. If they live there, they would want to go to the doctor at some point. They might need an attorney at some point. They might have, an education need. So, okay, this is a good comment. A lot depends on school location to community. School consolidated and located in a rural area, not really part of a community. Small school located in a small town, big part of the community. Trend to consolidation equals less community. Yes, so that is very true. And you see that in schools across the state that are in smaller areas. That's the hub. That's where everything takes place. That's where the sports are. That's where the events are. And so helping individuals, helping communities see how they can be involved and how important that connection is beneficial to both the communities and the schools. But it does make it a lot easier when they're in a smaller area and not as rural. So all of this information that I just shared with you, I'd like you to go to Menti one more time. Well, 2 more times, but for this purpose. And which one of the traps in public thinking has been most problematic during COVID, do you think? If you remember, the tangible triangle is the thinking that it is the responsibility of the teacher, students, and parents to educate a child. Caring is everything, prevents the understanding that it's more, engagement and education is more than just caring. Traditional is the narrow and shallow thinking that education and family engagement can only take place in the school. Culture of poverty is the thinking that certain communities, certain groups of people don't engage because they can't or they won't. And finally, the narrow benefits is the lack of knowledge about the connection between communities and schools. Oh, I'm going to add this. I'll throw the link down here for you as well. So we have some votes for each one. Oh, tangible triangle just took over culture of poverty. It looks like traditional engagement, though, is the one at the top. Can somebody, like I said, there's no right or wrong answer, but can somebody that included traditional engagement as their vote unmute themselves and tell us why? Any thoughts as to why that became the most difficult during COVID? Social distancing. Yes, all of the things that we said that typically make up traditional engagement, we couldn't do because schools were closed. We weren't allowed to have face-to-face contact, was problematic, all of those things. So what we have to remember, though, is, lack of technology for families as well. A lot of times we try to come up with neat and innovative ideas, but if technology was involved and it was an issue for connectivity for some of the families, then that took them out of the mix as well. Parents were not allowed in the buildings, and many were not able to communicate through technology. Without the student in the building, we lost total contact with some families. Yes, that happened. And I think that not only did you lose without student sibling, can't be with grandparents in some families because of social distancing. Not only did you lose some families, we lost some kids. There were teachers and principals that had said that, until they went door to door, there were children they hadn't seen in months. They weren't getting on for online learning. They weren't coming to the food distribution. And so that was the biggest probably challenge with family engagement, is that if you think of traditional engagement as the only way to engage in education, we couldn't do those things. So making sure that we have ways to understand that engagement can happen anywhere. It can happen at home. It can happen in the grocery store. It can happen in the movie. There are ways to engage in education anywhere for families and caregivers. So I promised that I would share, this is the resource that the Framework Institute has. And in the toolkit, when it goes through the various traps and when it goes through the various challenges, it gives you tip sheets for those. And it gives you, if you say this, they think this, so maybe change your wording into this. So it's a really neat resource. It's, something, like I said, that I really never, I didn't think about framing. I've thought about messaging before, but not really so much in the how it's said or, the specific wording of it. But again, Framework Institute, it's under, you'll see Reframing Family and School and Community Engagement. But it's just it's a nice toolkit that really helps you think a little bit more about your messaging, what you're saying about your program and how you're saying it. Make sure there's no questions. Okay. Parents are homeschooling and asking to send children to childcare in the afternoon. Okay, that's great. Yeah, they need to have that connection with others. There were teachers that weren't equipped to do online teaching, so kids lost that connection as well. Yes, so it was a very difficult time, and we're still coming back from that. And for those of you that are 21st century programs, you may not have kicked off your program yet, or it may be very new this school year, but you're going to see a lot of the need to rebuild those relationships and to reimagine what engagement can look like as you get into this new school year. So this is the information that I used to pull the resources from. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out if there's anything that you need or any other questions that you have. Email is usually the easiest way to reach me. And before we have 8 minutes, but before we go, if you could just complete this quick feedback survey using Menti again. I thank you for your time today. I know that it's been a long day, and we all have Zoom fatigue on various different levels. So I appreciate you joining. I appreciate the participation, and I hope if you have any questions or need anything in the future, you reach out and let me know. And Tricia, there's a question about STARS credit and how they take the survey for STARS credit.
You guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So what's going to happen is when you go to take the survey at the very last, I think it's the last question on there. It's going to ask you for your name and your STARS number. You'll put that in there then. Give us about 7 to 10 days to process everything, but it's going to be a little different than what you normally do. You don't have to go into the STARS calendar to sign up for anything. I will manually register you and complete you at the same time. So when that happens, you'll see that show up on your dashboard, and you'll be able to go through and complete the survey in there and download your certificate. You won't get a conference certificate, but you will get each one of the sessions are registered separately. So you'll have every session that you attended, you will have I'll be able to get that from the data that the folks that are putting on the session will send me. And each one of those sessions, I'll complete every session that you attended. So give us about 7 to 10 days to gather all that. After that time, if you haven't seen it, you can feel free to reach out to me, and I will put my email address in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, there was another question about if there's a separate survey for yesterday.
They're the same survey. That's on the website, and Susan will also email that out after the conference is over. So you'll have 2 different ways that you can access the survey, but it's the same survey for both days that's on the live on the website right now.
Okay, great. And then one last question. There was a question about how, if they don't have STARS, is there a way to get continuing ed credit?
That would be a question that would go to Susan Gamble. I'm taking care of the West Virginia STARS. I don't think there is continuing education credits granted, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, so Casey, you should get an email from Susan at the end, or if you probably have already gotten one from her already. So I would just reach out to her and ask if that's a possibility. All right, everyone. Thank you again. If there's anything I can do for you in the future, please let me know. The 3-question survey was just for me. So that, Emily, you had asked about that. So that's just for my purposes, for my feedback. What you need to complete for your stars is on the website, as well as something that will be sent out by Susan. And there's Trisha's email address for everyone.
I just realized when I put it in before, I just sent it directly to someone.
Oh, okay. Okay, Sabrina said she couldn't get into it, but maybe Susan, you think, Trisha, Susan will send it out?
Yeah, I went in to look at it this morning, just on the webpage, and I was able to access it today. I am in Google Chrome browser. I don't know if that matters or not, but I do know that Susan said that she was going to email it out as well.
Okay. One more, I lied because I said one more question. Now there's one more question. Where is the survey on the web page, Trisha? What web page? Maybe
it's on the conference web page right at the top with the tabs.
Okay, conference web page right at the top. So let me see if I can.
I have it pulled up right now, and it says home session access on demand library. It actually says conference evaluation and not conference survey.
Okay, so conference evaluation. Oh, Casey shared it. Thank you. Yes, there it is. Awesome. Okay, thank you again, everyone. Hopefully, Rhonda, that pointed you in the right direction.
Amy, are we all set?